Ancient maps aren't supposed to predict the future. They're relics, historical curiosities documenting what people knew centuries ago. Except some of them show things that shouldn't be possible. Coastlines that didn't exist when they were drawn. Continents positioned with accuracy that required technology inventors hadn't created yet. And if you look closely enough, patterns emerge. Patterns that suggest these cartographers weren't just mapping their present. They were preserving warnings about catastrophes still to come. 1513. An Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis sits in Constantinople, compiling navigation charts for the Sultan's fleet. He's working from source maps. Some, he claims, date back thousands of years. When he finishes, his map shows something extraordinary. Antarctica. The coastline matches perfectly every inlet and peninsula. One problem: Antarctica won't be officially discovered for another 300 years. And the coastline he drew, it shows the land beneath the ice, terrain that's been buried under a mile of frozen water for 6,000 years. The map surfaced in 1929 during palace renovations in Istanbul. A German theologian named Gustav Deissmann found it rolled up, forgotten in the archives. The date was clear: 1513. But when researchers compared it to modern surveys, they froze. The Antarctic portion matched seismic data from expeditions in 1949, data that revealed the actual bedrock topography hidden under all that ice. The United States Air Force got involved in 1960. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Ohlmeyer, chief of the cartographic section, analysed the map against their latest surveys. His official letter stated they had no explanation for how the map could show features that matched their classified data. The correlation coefficient was 0.98. Nearly perfect. This wasn't artistic license or lucky guessing. The longitude placement was accurate to standards Europe wouldn't achieve until the 18th century, 200 years after Piri Reis died. Someone mapped Antarctica when it was ice-free. Before the Younger Dryas event, before the flood myths that every ancient culture somehow shares. Piri Reis left notes on the map itself. He wrote that he'd compiled it from approximately 20 source charts. Some, he claimed, dated to the time of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE. He specifically mentioned using a map that belonged to Christopher Columbus. But where did Columbus get his map? And where did those ancient sources come from? Here's what makes this genuinely unsettling. Piri Reis wasn't alone. 18 years later in Paris, a French mathematician named Orontius Phineas published another world map. He used an elegant heart-shaped projection, splitting the globe into 2 lobes. At the bottom, centered on the South Pole, he drew Antarctica. Not as a theoretical landmass, as a detailed continent with mountain ranges, rivers flowing from interior highlands to the coast, and coastal features that match the actual bedrock geography beneath the ice. The continent's width on his map? 6,500 miles. The real Antarctica measures 5,500 miles across. For a 16th century scholar drawing a theoretical southern land that wouldn't be confirmed for 3 centuries, that's a remarkable estimate. But the precision goes deeper. Phineas showed mountain ranges in roughly the correct positions for the trans-Antarctic mountains. Those weren't confirmed until 20th century expeditions. He depicted rivers flowing from highlands to coast. Pure fantasy, researchers said, until seismic surveys in 1957 and 1958 revealed subglacial river valleys in similar positions. He included bays and inlets that correspond to features mapped by modern sonar. Charles Hapgood published his analysis in 1966. He included testimony from Air Force cartographers confirming that features on the Phineas map matched Antarctic seismic data. Not approximately, matched. The standard explanation is that ancient Greek scholars theorized about a southern continent for symmetry. Medieval cartographers inherited this concept and drew speculative southern lands. Any resemblance to reality is coincidence. The mountains and rivers are decorative elements. Except Phineas wasn't decorating. He was a mathematician who worked in coordinates. When you overlay his Antarctic continent on modern maps using his era's projection mathematics, the interior features correlate with subglacial geography in specific positions. If he was randomly placing mountains and rivers, the odds of putting them where they actually exist are astronomically small. 2 cartographers, 18 years apart, different countries. Both produced Antarctic coastlines matching subglacial reality. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. 1737. Philippe Bouache stands before the French Royal Academy of Sciences. He's the king's own geographer, and the map he's presenting shows Antarctica divided into two separate islands. A sea channel runs from one side of the continent to the other. His colleagues dismiss it as speculation. 221 years later, scientists drill through the ice and discover he was right. The Transantarctic mountain range divides the continent. Below the ice sheet, a channel of bedrock sits below sea level, connecting two seas. Remove the ice, and you'd have two islands. Exactly as Bouache drew in 1737, 83 years before Antarctica's official discovery. Modern bedrock elevation maps, including the Comprehensive Bedmap 2 project from 2013, confirm it. West Antarctica is separated from East Antarctica by a below sea level channel. Bouache stated his map came from various ancient sources and Spanish reports. He never specified which ones or how he obtained them, but he placed a dividing waterway exactly where it exists beneath miles of ice. 3 maps, 3 impossible accuracies, all showing Antarctica as it existed before catastrophic climate change buried it under ice. Before sea levels rose and drowned coastal civilizations, before whatever event the flood myths describe. But Antarctica isn't the only impossibility these ancient cartographers preserved. 1569. Gerardus Mercator publishes his revolutionary world map. The projection system he invents will be used for the next 5 centuries. He's the greatest cartographer of the Renaissance, working for emperors and dukes. On his map, he includes a polar inset showing the Arctic. At the centre sits a massive black magnetic mountain surrounded by an open sea. 4 rivers flow outward, dividing the Arctic into 4 islands. He labels the mountain Rupes Nigra, the Black Rock. He's never been there. No European has successfully reached the North Pole, but his sources insist it's real. He explicitly cites a lost 14th century text called Inventio Fortunatae, supposedly written by an English monk describing a voyage to the pole. Multiple medieval scholars reference this text. Every copy has vanished. Only Mercator's map preserves whatever geography it described. Arctic expeditions in later centuries found only ice at the pole, but submarine studies in the 20th century confirmed the Arctic basin bathymetry includes a deep central basin surrounded by submarine ridges, a structure that echoes what Mercator drew. He wasn't alone in depicting an ice-free Arctic. Medieval Norse sagas describe voyages beyond documented settlements. Some researchers propose the ice-free polar sea reflects memory of the Holocene climatic optimum, a warm period from 9,000 to 5,000 years ago when Arctic ice coverage was dramatically reduced. What if these maps aren't showing the world as it was when they were drawn? What if they're showing the world as it will be again? Climate doesn't move in one direction. It cycles. Ice ages advance and retreat, sea levels rise and fall, coastlines appear and vanish. The Younger Dryas event 12,800 years ago triggered rapid climate shifts. Temperatures plummeted, then shot upward within decades. Ice sheets collapsed. Meltwater pulses raised sea levels by hundreds of feet, drowning coastal settlements across the globe. Every ancient culture has flood myths. Noah, Utnapishtim, Manu, Viracocha. Different names, same story. Water rising, cities drowning, knowledge lost. Mainstream archaeology calls it convergent mythology. Universal human fears manifesting in similar narratives. But what if it's memory, collective cultural trauma preserved in story form? And what if the cartographers who created these source maps weren't just recording what they'd seen? What if they were warning about what would happen again? The maps show Antarctica, ice is free. They show an Arctic with open seas. They show coastlines at positions that only make sense if sea levels were dramatically different. lower during ice ages when water was locked in glaciers, higher during warm periods when ice sheets melted. We're in a warm period now. Arctic ice is retreating, Greenland's ice sheet is melting, Antarctica's western shelf is destabilizing. Sea levels are rising, coastal cities are beginning to flood. The maps might be showing us our future by preserving the past. 1559. An Ottoman cartographer named Haji Ahmed sits in his studio drawing a world map. He's never sailed the Pacific Ocean. No Ottoman ship has. The empire's naval power is concentrated in the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, the Red Sea. European explorers only crossed the Pacific 37 years earlier, and their charts are state secrets. Yet Ahmed is drawing Pacific coastlines, the western edge of the Americas from Alaska to Chile, the eastern shores of China and Japan. Islands scattered across the ocean between, he's drawing them with accuracy. European surveyors won't match for 3 more centuries. His map shows California, Baja California, and the Pacific Northwest with detail that won't appear in Spanish charts until 1602, 43 years later. The Alaskan coastline resembles actual geography. Alaska won't be explored by Europeans until 1741, 182 years after this map. The coastlines of Japan, China, and Southeast Asia appear with precision Europeans struggled to achieve after decades of direct trade. There's no documentation of how Ahmed acquired this data. The Ottoman Empire had no Pacific presence. But somehow, sitting in his studio, he produced coastlines matching reality better than the actual explorers who'd sailed those waters. The longitude accuracy alone defies explanation. Solving the longitude problem required Harrison's marine chronometer in 1761, 202 years after Ahmed's map. Without accurate longitude, you can't position coastlines correctly relative to each other. Yet Ahmed did. Where did he get his information? Chinese maritime exploration is one possibility. Admiral Zheng, his treasure fleet voyages from 1405 to 1433, reached Southeast Asia, India, and East Africa. Some researchers argue they went further. Did Chinese Pacific charts exist, later acquired by Ottomans through Silk Road networks? Or did someone map the Pacific millennia before Europeans, with fragments surviving in archives? The pattern keeps repeating. Maps showing impossible knowledge, accuracy that shouldn't exist, geography preserved from sources that have vanished. October 1502. Lisbon, Portugal. Alberto Cantino stands in a darkened room, his heart hammering against his ribs. Before him lies a map that could get him killed. He spent months bribing Portuguese officials, waiting for this moment. The Portuguese guard their navigation data under penalty of death. Pilots require security clearances. Charts are classified state secrets. The Crown understands that whoever controls the maps controls exploration, trade and empires. And what Cantino holds is the most valuable secret in Europe. The Brazilian coastline stretches across the parchment in impossible detail. Brazil was officially discovered by Cabral in 1500, only 2 years earlier. Yet this map shows thousands of miles of coast with precision, suggesting decades of exploration. The official record claims Portuguese expeditions had only reached 28 degrees south by 1502. This map extends to 35 degrees south. Who mapped the rest? The Africs. And coast curves around the Cape of Good Hope, with accuracy matching Vasco da Gama's voyage data from 1497 to 1499, but exceeding what was publicly published. The Caribbean islands appear in detail. The Indian Ocean coastlines, including India and Ceylon, render with remarkable precision for such an early date. Most impossibly, the longitude is correct. Without chronometers, that shouldn't be possible. Cantino smuggles the map to Italy, hidden in cloth bundles. When King Manuel I learns of the theft, his fury is documented in court records. But the question historians avoid asking is simple. Why? If the map simply showed 2 years of Brazilian coastal surveys, why the extreme reaction? What information on this parchment was worth killing to protect? The Cantino-planisphere survives in the Biblioteca Estense in Modena, Italy. It's the oldest surviving Portuguese nautical chart showing post-Columbian discoveries, and it proves something uncomfortable. Portuguese exploration was far more advanced than publicly acknowledged. They were mapping coastlines years before official discoveries to maintain competitive advantages over rival powers. Or they had access to older charts, maps from Phoenician, Roman, or Arab sources providing reconnaissance before they even sailed. Some researchers propose Portugal discovered Brazil before Cabral, keeping it secret until politically advantageous. The map shows too much too accurately too soon. Either Portuguese navigators were decades ahead of documented history, or they were following routes someone else had already charted. The longitude accuracy alone demands explanation. European cartographers wouldn't achieve that precision until the 18th century after Harrison's chronometer solved the problem. Yet here it sits, 1,502, drawn with confidence by anonymous Portuguese cartographers who somehow knew things they shouldn't. April 25th, 1507. The village of Saint-Dié in the Duchy of Lorraine, nestled in the Vosges Mountains. Martin Waldseemüller finishes inking the last details on a 12-panel woodcut map. He's about to name a continent, America, honouring the explorer, Amerigo Vespucci. 1,000 copies will be printed and distributed across Europe. But there's something on this map that makes no sense. Waldseemüller has drawn the Pacific Ocean 6 years before Balboa will officially sight it from Panama. He's shown South America as a separate continent, distinct from Asia. He's depicted geography that won't be discovered for years. The map measures approximately 4.5 feet by 8 feet when assembled. It's the first map to use the name America, the first to show America as a separate continent. Most impossibly, it depicts the Pacific Ocean as a large body of water separating America from Asia. Balboa won't reach the Pacific until 1513, 6 years after publication. Magellan won't cross it until 1521, 14 years later. Yet Waldseemüller drew it in 1507. The map shows South America with a western coastline despite no European having sailed along that coast by 1507. The shape suggests foreknowledge of its complete outline. The Pacific Ocean appears at approximately correct size relative to the Atlantic and surrounding land masses. This wasn't decorative speculation. It was a fundamental geographic statement. Waldseemüller was declaring that a vast ocean separated the New World from Asia. He cited Vespucci's letters and the ancient geographer Ptolemy as sources, but neither contained information about the Pacific. He was a respected scholar who'd studied under major cartographic authorities. The map was produced as an authoritative reference work, not fantasy. Then something strange happened. In 1513, when Waldseemüller reprinted the map in a new edition, he removed the name America and altered the Pacific depiction, almost as if he'd been told to retract information that was too revealing. What changed his mind? The standard explanation claims Waldseemüller was speculating based on logic. Educated people knew Earth was round. Columbus and Vespucci had reached what appeared to be a new world. Simple reasoning suggested another ocean probably separated it from Asia. The western coastline shown is imaginative conjecture. The Pacific is hypothetical space filling. But Waldseemüller wasn't drawing fantasy. He was a trained cartographer working with a scholarly academy. The map was produced as serious geographical science. The proportions of the Pacific are remarkably close to reality. If he was guessing, why did he guess right? And why remove America and alter the Pacific in later editions? What information became too sensitive to publish? Some researchers suggest Waldseemüller accessed undocumented Portuguese or Spanish charts showing Pacific voyages predating official records. Could Portuguese explorers have reached the Pacific years before Balboa via secret southern routes around South America? Others point to possible Asian sources. Chinese maps showing the Pacific from Western perspectives existed. Could such charts have reached Europe via Silk Road trade networks? Most provocatively, did pre-Columbian maps showing both ocean coasts of the Americas exist, stored in monastery libraries or private collections Waldseemüller accessed? The one surviving copy was discovered in a German castle in 1901 and purchased by the Library of Congress in 2003 for $10 million, the highest price ever paid for a historical document at that time. That's not the price tag for lucky guesswork. That's the cost of something that changes history. 1402, the third year of King Taizong's reign in the Joseon dynasty. Korean astronomers and cartographers Yi Ho and Gwon Gyun complete a world map for the royal court. Korea appears in meticulous detail expected for their homeland. China and Japan render with careful accuracy, natural given centuries of contact. But they've also drawn India, the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. And Africa's shape on this map matches reality better than any European map will for another 100 years. The Gangnedo map was created by royal scholars with access to the Joseon dynasty's extensive library, and Chinese scholarly networks built over centuries of cultural exchange. The original is lost, but two 15th century copies survive. One at Ryukoku University in Japan, another at Honkoji Temple. The map was based on Chinese, Korean, and Japanese sources. It's the oldest known Korean map to show Africa, Europe, and Arabia. The African continent appears with remarkably accurate shape and proportions, elongated north to south with correct tapering at the southern end. This accuracy comes 93 years before the Portuguese rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488. The map depicts Europe and the Mediterranean with surprising precision despite Korea having no documented contact with European exploration. The proportionate width to height ratio of Africa matches reality. Modern cartographic analysis shows Africa's proportions are closer to actual geography than European Ptolemaic maps of the same era. The map's preface clearly states it was compiled from Chinese, Japanese, and Islamic sources. Korean maritime history shows no voyages to Africa, Europe, or the Indian Ocean during this period. Yet here sits Africa, drawn correctly by scholars who'd never been there. The mainstream explanation relies on transmission through networks. Islamic cartographers had explored and mapped Africa's east coast through maritime trade routes. Chinese travellers reached India and the Middle East via the Silk Road. This knowledge was shared through merchant and scholarly networks connecting the Islamic world, China, and Korea. Korean cartographers were synthesizing second-hand accounts from travellers' tales and existing maps. But Islamic maps of the 15th century don't show Africa with this level of accuracy. They render northern Africa well, regions they'd explored and traded with for centuries, but they distort sub-Saharan regions, making the continent too wide or misshaping southern portions. Chinese maps of the era are even less accurate for Africa. The Gangnedo isn't just copying inferior sources, it's showing Africa better than the supposed original sources show it. How did Korean scholars sitting thousands of miles from Africa compile a more accurate African map than the Arabs and Chinese who'd actually been there? The answer might lie in fragments of much older cartographic knowledge. Roman maps may have reached China via the Silk Road. Romans traded extensively with India and had some knowledge of Africa's shape from circumnavigation accounts. Phoenician mariners working for Egyptian pharaohs reportedly sailed around Africa as early as 600 BCE, according to Herodotus. Could fragments of ancient Mediterranean cartography have survived in Chinese imperial archives, later compiled by Korean scholars? Or did Chinese maritime exploration of Africa predate Portuguese exploration by centuries with records kept in imperial archives? Admiral Zhenghe's treasure fleet voyages occurred from 1405 to 1433 after the Gangnedo was made. But could earlier undocumented Chinese maritime exploration have mapped Africa with charts preserved? The pattern repeats. Impossible accuracy. Knowledge that shouldn't exist. Geography preserved from sources that have vanished. Every answer leads to more questions. Every map reveals another layer of forgotten history. These aren't isolated curiosities, they're pieces of something larger. Evidence that the world was known, mapped, and understood long before the official timeline admits. Someone charted these coasts, someone calculated these longitudes, someone understood the shape of continents before the age of discovery supposedly began. The maps survived, the knowledge endured. But the civilizations that created them disappeared into the same floods, the same cataclysms, the same rising seas they may have been trying to warn us about. The Zeno map. 1558. Venice. You're Niccolo Zeno the Younger, and you're about to publish something that will make you either famous or infamous. You found letters and a map in your family's archives, documents supposedly written by your ancestors, Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, describing a voyage they made to the far North Atlantic in the 1390s, a full century before Columbus. The map shows Greenland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands. It shows mysterious lands called Estotiland and Freyland, places that seem to match North America and phantom islands that will appear on maps for the next 200 years. If it's authentic, your ancestors crossed the Atlantic 100 years before Columbus, proving the official history of discovery is incomplete. But if it's a hoax, you're about to commit one of history's most elaborate frauds. The map was published by Niccolo Zeno the Younger in 1558, claiming to reproduce documents from ancestors who allegedly sailed the North Atlantic in the 1390s. It shows Greenland, Iceland, Faroe Islands, and a mysterious island called Friesland, positioned between Iceland and Greenland. It describes another land called Estotiland to the west, which some identify as North America. The map has been controversial since publication. Some scholars call it an elaborate hoax. Others defend its authenticity or argue it contains genuine information mixed with errors and embellishments. Here's what makes it impossible to dismiss entirely. The depiction of Greenland and Iceland contains accurate features not present in other contemporary European maps. Friesland appears nowhere in reality. Yet it was incorporated into maps by major cartographers including Mercator and Ortelius for the next 200 years. They took it seriously. The Estotiland accounts describe a land west of Greenland with temperate climate, European-style buildings, and Latin books. This description matches Norse settlements in Newfoundland, confirmed archaeologically at Lanceau Meadows in 1960. The Zeno family was a prominent Venetian dynasty with documented naval service. They had access to navigation records and participated in Mediterranean naval campaigns. Venetian naval activity in the North Atlantic is documented through trade connections with England and Northern Europe. The map influenced major cartographers including Abraham Ortelius and Gerardus Mercator, suggesting professional cartographers found it credible. The mainstream explanation is fraud. The Zeno map is a 16th century fabrication, possibly created by Niccolo the Younger to glorify his family history. Freyland is pure invention. No such island exists. The accurate Greenland features were simply copied from recent Portuguese or Danish maps that Zeno had access to. The story of the 1390s voyage is fiction, perhaps inspired by Norse sagas that circulated in Europe. But if it's a simple hoax designed to fool common readers, why did professional cartographers like Mercator and Ortelius incorporate its data into their own maps? They had access to the best geographical knowledge of the 16th century. They would have recognized obvious fraud. They were in direct competition with each other and had strong incentives to expose false information. Yet they included Friesland and referenced the Zeno narrative as credible. The Greenland features are more accurate than some contemporary maps, suggesting the Zenos or their source had genuine navigation data from somewhere. The Estotiland account, while romanticised, contains details that match Norse Newfoundland settlements discovered archaeologically 400 years after the Zeno map was published. How would a 16th century Italian forger know to describe European-style buildings and books in precisely the location where Norse settlements actually existed? Perhaps the map preserves authentic Norse navigation knowledge transmitted through Iceland or Scandinavia to visiting Venetian merchants or sailors. Venice maintained extensive trade networks, including the Baltic and North Sea. The Zeno brothers could have participated in Norse-guided voyages, with later publication adding embellishments. Or Portuguese fishing fleets may have secretly fished the Grand Banks off North America decades before Columbus. Venetian navigators might have learned these routes. The questions multiply. Was the 1390 voyage genuine, embellished, or completely fabricated? Why did credible cartographers accept the map's data if it was obvious fraud? What explains the accurate Greenland features that exceed contemporary European maps? From contested Atlantic voyages, we return to where this investigation began, to the ancient world and the Mediterranean. Because the most impossible map of all might be one that claims its knowledge came from sources older than Rome itself. The Fra Mauro map, 1450. The monastery island of Murano near Venice. You're Fra Mauro, a Camaldolese monk and professional cartographer. You've spent years creating a masterpiece, a circular map 6 feet and 4 inches in diameter. The most detailed world map of your era. But you've done something radical that makes other scholars uncomfortable. You've flipped the world upside down, placing south at the top, north at the bottom. Not as a mistake or artistic whim, but as a statement. Because your sources, ancient Arabic texts, Chinese accounts and Roman charts, show the world from a different perspective than medieval Europe remembers. And those sources tell you something that contradicts official history. They tell you that someone sailed completely around Africa's southern tip in 1420. 68 years before the Portuguese Dias expedition that's credited with the discovery. Your map, with its 3,000 annotations and references to ancient ones, suggests that Europe isn't discovering the world. It's remembering it. Fra Mauro died in 1464. He was a Venetian monk who ran a professional cartography workshop that served clients across Europe. The map was commissioned by King Afonso V of Portugal, which is significant. Portugal was actively exploring the African coast, and they wanted the best geographical knowledge available. The completed map from around 1450 and a copy made in 1453 survives in the Biblioteca Marciana in Venice. It represents a synthesis of Ptolemaic classical geography, Islamic scholarship, Chinese accounts, and medieval European knowledge. The map shows accurate Indian Ocean geography with the Indian subcontinent, Ceylon, Southeast Asia, and Indonesia, rendered with surprisingly accurate proportions and positions. The African coast extends all the way to the Cape of Good Hope, 38 years before Bartolomeu Dias officially rounded it in 1488. The map contains one particularly explosive annotation. It describes a European ship sailing around Africa's south coast in 1420. If accurate, this predates Dias by 68 years. Fra Mauro extensively cites his sources in over 3,000 textual annotations. He references ancient ones. Ptolemy, Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant Niccolò dei Conti, who travelled to India and Southeast Asia, and Islamic geographers. The south-up orientation is unusual for European maps, but common in Islamic cartography, suggesting his Islamic sources were significant. The map incorporates data that may have come from Chinese sources, possibly including information from Admiral Jing He's treasure fleet voyages from 1405 to 1433. Fra Mauro ran a professional workshop. His clients included European nobility and the Portuguese crown. This wasn't amateur work. He was producing maps for people making life and death navigation decisions and imperial policy. The mainstream explanation is that the map represents the pinnacle of medieval cartography, synthesizing all available knowledge from multiple traditions. The south-up orientation is an aesthetic choice or a reflection of Islamic cartographic conventions, not evidence of ancient sources. The annotation about 1420 circumnavigation of Africa is either an error, an embellishment, or refers to earlier Portuguese exploration that wasn't fully documented in surviving records. The accuracy reflects Venice's unique position as a trade hub, with merchant contacts extending across the known world from northern Europe to China. Fra Mauro had access to travellers, merchants, and texts that others didn't. But Fra Mauro explicitly and repeatedly references ancient ones and sources predating medieval contact. He wasn't vague about this. The African circumnavigation annotation is oddly specific. 1420, European ship, likely Portuguese. If it's fabrication or Portuguese propaganda, why would a Venetian monk whose city was a rival to Portugal help spread it? The Indian Ocean accuracy exceeds what Marco Polo described. Polo's account was important but incomplete for maritime navigation. This suggests Fra Mauro had access to additional Asian sources, possibly Arab or Chinese maritime charts. When Portuguese explorers finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, they reportedly found ruins of ancient stone pillars along the coast. Evidence perhaps that someone had been there before and marked the route. Fra Mauro's map might preserve knowledge from Phoenician or Roman maritime exploration. Phoenicians working for Egyptian pharaohs reportedly sailed around Africa circa 600 BCE, according to Herodotus. Romans traded extensively with India via the Red Sea. Roman coins have been found in India, Vietnam, and possibly further east. This maritime knowledge could have survived in Arabic texts after the Islamic conquest, accessed by Venetian scholars through trade contacts. Alternatively, the Portuguese may have secretly reached the Cape of Good Hope decades before Dias, keeping it classified while they established dominance. Fra Mauro, working for the Portuguese crown, would have had access to state secrets. The map might reveal that the age of discovery was actually the age of rediscovery, Europeans following routes and finding places that ancient Mediterranean civilizations had already reached and mapped. What were the ancient sources Fra Mauro referenced? And where are they now? Did Portuguese or other Europeans reach the Cape of Good Hope before Dias, keeping it secret for strategic reasons? How much ancient Mediterranean and Asian geographical knowledge was lost to medieval Europe, but preserved in Islamic and Byzantine libraries? These 10 maps span from Constantinople to Korea, from Ottoman admirals to Venetian monks, from Antarctica's ice to the Arctic's magnetic pole. Each one whispers the same impossible message. Someone knew this world before we thought they did. 10 maps. 10 impossibilities. The Piri Reis map showing Antarctica's coastline without ice, matching terrain not seen for 6,000 years. The Oronteus Phineus map depicting the same ice-free continent with mountains and rivers in positions confirmed only by 20th century seismic surveys. Philippe Boitsch, correctly dividing Antarctica into two landmasses separated by a channel, proven right 221 years later. Mercator's Arctic map, showing detailed polar geography, citing lost sources. Haji Ahmed drawing the Pacific with accuracy, exceeding contemporary European explorers, despite the Ottoman Empire having no Pacific presence. The Cantino planisphere, stolen because it revealed too much too soon. Waldseemüller showing the Pacific Ocean 6 years before its official discovery, then removing the depiction in later editions. The Cangnido proving advanced cartography transcended east-west boundaries. The controversial Zeno map influencing major cartographers for centuries. And Fra Mauro's masterpiece explicitly citing ancient sources and depicting voyages, history books, claim never happened. The pattern is undeniable. These aren't isolated curiosities scattered randomly across time and space. They're glimpses of something larger, something that challenges the linear narrative we've been taught about human progress and discovery. The mainstream explanation remains steadfast. These maps represent the cutting edge of their respective eras, compiled from fragmentary knowledge, traveller accounts, and educated speculation. The accuracies are exaggerated by believers who cherry-pick correct features while ignoring countless errors. The similarities result from convergent reasoning, smart people in different places arriving at similar conclusions about geography. Ancient sources mentioned by cartographers refer to Ptolemy, not some lost civilization. When Fra Mauro says ancient ones, he means classical Greek and Roman texts, not pre-flood maps. The impossible coastlines are misidentified known lands, projection distortions, or lucky guesses amplified by confirmation bias. But this explanation requires ignoring the specific details. It requires dismissing military cartographers who confirmed Antarctic accuracy. It requires explaining away longitude precision achieved centuries before the chronometer. It requires accepting that multiple independent cartographers across different cultures somehow guessed the same impossible coastlines correctly. The alternative asks uncomfortable questions. What if knowledge doesn't only move forward? What if civilizations rise, achieve sophisticated understanding, then collapse, leaving fragments that later cultures mistake for mythology or misinterpret entirely? The geological record shows repeated catastrophic events. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests a comet strike around 10,800 BCE triggered rapid climate change, megafaunal extinction, and sea level rise that would have drowned coastal civilizations. Meltwater Pulse 1a around 14,600 years ago raised sea levels 50 feet in less than 500 years. Meltwater Pulse 1b around 11,300 years ago added another rapid rise. Any advanced maritime culture living on continental shelves would have been obliterated, their cities now under 300 feet of water. Graham Hancock argues in Fingerprints of the Gods that an advanced civilization existed during the last ice age, possessing sophisticated astronomical knowledge, maritime capability, and mathematical understanding. This civilization was destroyed by cataclysm around 10,800 BCE. Survivors scattered to different regions, becoming the civilizing heroes of mythology. Osiris in Egypt, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Viracocha in South America. They brought knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, architecture, and yes, cartography. The maps we've examined might be the last surviving copies of copies of copies, degraded through millennia, but retaining enough accuracy to prove they originated from direct observation, not speculation. Charles Hapgood proposed Earth crust displacement, a mechanism where the entire outer crust of the planet shifts position relative to the inner layers, causing continents to move rapidly to different latitudes. This would explain how Antarctic coastlines could have been mapped when ice-free, then shifted to polar position and frozen. While mainstream geology rejects sudden crust displacement, the theory attracted attention from figures including Albert Einstein, who wrote the foreword to Hapgood's 1953 book acknowledging the idea's plausibility before more data was available. The Piri Reis and Orontius Phineus maps might genuinely show Antarctica as it appeared 6,000 or more years ago before the last phase of glaciation covered the coasts. If so, someone was there, someone mapped it. Someone preserved those maps through the collapse of their civilization, through whatever catastrophe ended their world. Those maps survived in libraries, Alexandria perhaps, before it burned, Byzantine archives, Islamic collections in Baghdad and Damascus. They were copied, recopied, fragments combining with fragments until Ottoman admirals and French mathematicians drew coastlines they'd never seen because someone long forgotten had seen them and written it down. Or perhaps the explanation is more mundane but equally suppressed. Perhaps Portuguese, Spanish and Chinese explorers reached far more of the world far earlier than official histories admit, keeping discoveries secret for strategic advantage. The Cantino theft proves Portugal guarded cartographic data under penalty of death. What else did they hide? Did Portuguese ships round Africa in 1420, as Fra Mauro claimed? Did Chinese treasure fleets map the Pacific and Americas decades before Columbus? Did Norse explorers maintain continuous contact with North America through the medieval period, their knowledge filtering into European cartography through Icelandic and Venetian intermediaries? The Cangnido proves knowledge flowed globally through networks we barely understand. Korean scholars in 1402 compiled African geography more accurate than the explorers who'd actually been there. How? Because information moved through merchant networks, scholarly exchanges, and diplomatic channels that connected civilizations across Eurasia. Maps were currency, strategic intelligence, state secrets. The best cartographers had access to restricted archives, private collections, and classified reports. They synthesized data from sources we'll never recover because most were destroyed, lost, or deliberately suppressed. Every answer generates more questions. If the maps preserve pre-catastrophe knowledge, where are the other artifacts? Where are the tools, the buildings, the clear archaeological signatures? If they document secret exploration, why isn't there more evidence in the form of shipwrecks, trade goods, or genetic markers? The counter-argument points to 400 feet of sea level rise since the last glacial maximum. The continental shelves where ancient maritime civilizations would have built their ports are now deep underwater, covered by sediment. We've explored less than 5% of the ocean floor in high resolution. Entire landscapes lie buried and forgotten. Archaeological sites like Göbekli Tepe, Gunung Padang and Dwarka suggest the timeline of civilization is far older than mid-20th century academics established. Each discovery pushes the boundaries back. Each radiocarbon date challenges the narrative. If humans were building sophisticated temple complexes 11,600 years ago, what else were they doing? If they understood astronomy well enough to align monuments to precession cycles lasting 26,000 years, did they also map the world? The maps force a choice. Either accept their elaborate hoaxes, lucky guesses, and misidentified coastlines that coincidentally match reality, or accept that someone, somewhere, sometime before recorded history knew this planet in ways we're only now rediscovering. That they sailed oceans we think were uncharted. They mapped coastlines we believe were unknown. They possessed knowledge that survived their civilization's collapse in fragments, copied through millennia by cultures that no longer understood what they were preserving. 10 maps. 10 windows into a past that shouldn't exist according to the official timeline. They sit in libraries and museums, displayed as curiosities, historical oddities, cartographic evolution. But look closer. Measure the coordinates, compare the coastlines, check the dates. The impossible accuracy isn't subjective, it's mathematical. The longitude shouldn't work, the Antarctic coastline shouldn't match, the Pacific shouldn't appear 6 years early. Yet there it is, drawn in ink on gazelle skin and parchment, signed by admirals and monks who swore they copied from ancient sources. What happened to those sources? Where did the original maps go? Libraries burn. Archives flood, empires fall and their records scatter. The Library of Alexandria contained an estimated 400,000 scrolls. When it burned, how much geographical knowledge vanished? Constantinople's imperial library held texts from across the Byzantine Empire. When the city fell in 1453, collections were looted, destroyed or sold to private collectors. How many ancient maps disappeared into European aristocratic collections later lost to fire, war or deliberate destruction? Islamic libraries in Baghdad, Damascus and Cordoba held translations of Greek, Roman, Persian and Indian texts. The Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258 destroyed the House of Wisdom, centuries of accumulated knowledge thrown into the Tigris until the river ran black with ink. What maps drowned in that river? The maps we have might be the lucky survivors, the fragments that escaped destruction through accident or deliberate preservation. Each one a ghost, pointing toward a larger body of knowledge that no longer exists. If Piri Rice had access to 20 source maps and we have only his compilation, where are the other 19? If Fra Mauro cited ancient sources plural, where's the archive he accessed? If Mercator referenced Inventio Fortunatae, why hasn't a single copy survived when multiple scholars confirmed its existence? Perhaps the real mystery isn't what the maps show, it's what happened to the knowledge they represent. Civilizations rise and fall, knowledge accumulates, then vanishes in flames and floods. We assume progress moves in one direction, but history suggests something different. A cycle. Rising complexity followed by collapse. Sophisticated understanding lost, then slowly rebuilt. The maps might be proof that we've been here before, not at this exact technological level, but at a level of geographical understanding, astronomical observation, and mathematical precision that rivals or exceeds what existed in the medieval period. The question isn't whether these maps are impossible. Clearly they exist. The question is whether we're willing to revise our understanding of history to account for them. Whether we can accept that the neat timeline of human progress from primitive to advanced might be incomplete. That before Sumer and Egypt, before the first cities we acknowledge, there might have been others. Maritime cultures that mapped the world during the Ice Age when sea levels were lower and coastlines extended hundreds of miles beyond their current positions. Cultures that understood astronomy, mathematics, and navigation. Cultures that were destroyed when the ice melted and the seas rose, leaving only fragments. Maps copied and recopied through millennia until Ottoman admirals and French scholars drew them in the 16th century, never knowing they were preserving the last echoes of a world that drowned 10,000 years before. The maps remain, the questions remain, and somewhere beneath 400 feet of ocean water, on continental shelves that were once coastal plains, the answers wait in the ruins of cities that aren't supposed to exist. The maps don't lie. They can't. Ink on parchment doesn't rewrite itself to match modern surveys. Coastlines drawn in 1513 don't magically align with seismic data from 1949 through coincidence. Longitude calculations don't accidentally achieve 18th century precision in the 16th century. Either these cartographers possessed knowledge that shouldn't exist, or our entire understanding of human history is incomplete. We've been taught a comfortable narrative. Civilization began in Mesopotamia 6,000 years ago. Writing, agriculture, cities, all emerging in a neat linear progression. Before that, scattered hunter-gatherers with no capacity for sophisticated thought. The maps shatter that story. They whisper of something older, something lost. A world that knew itself before the floods came, before the ice melted, before sea levels rose and drowned the evidence beneath hundreds of feet of water. Perhaps we're not discovering the world, we're remembering it. And these maps, drawn by admirals and monks who swore they copied from ancient sources, are the last fragments of that memory. The question isn't whether they're real. They exist in museums and libraries, measured and analysed by military cartographers who confirmed what shouldn't be possible. The question is whether we're ready to accept what they mean, that history moves in cycles, that knowledge rises and falls, that we might not be the first civilization to chart this planet. The answers are waiting, not in libraries or archives, but beneath the waves, on continental shelves that were once coastlines, in the ruins of cities that drowned when the world changed. Until we look there, the maps will keep their secrets. But they've already told us enough. Someone was here before, someone knew, and they left us a warning written in coastlines and coordinates, a message from a world that ended, preserved by cartographers who never understood what they were copying. The flood came once. These maps suggest it's coming again.